Feeling frustrated, feeling depressed, feeling disappointed is the best thing that will ever happen to you. It is a sign in your body, first and foremost, that you know something isn't right, that you're on the wrong path. The power of having a strong emotion like that can turn your life around. And you can go one of two ways in that. You can sink further and further down, or you can tell yourself, I know there's something else within me. That's why I'm depressed. Lean into that emotion because it's telling you that something isn't right. You've got to figure it out.
Do you think that you sort of represent a general truth about human beings, that they're all weird and they're all created for this purpose, and that if they seek long enough, they will find it? I mean, unless, they get prematurely hit by a bus or something. Or do you think that you are, not all humans are like that, and some of us are more archetypally designed to just fit into various roles in the machine, and then there's a few of us weirdos that go around and make all the noise?
Well, I believe the former is the truth, and I wrote about that in my book, Mastery. In Mastery, I'm trying to show you the path to becoming great in whatever your field is, whether it's music, chess, sports, science, whatever. And the idea is, when you were born, scientifically, you are a unique individual. There is nobody that will ever have Jeff Lerner's DNA, never in the billions of years, on other planets even, or in the going far into the future. There will never be another person with your exact sequence of genes, of DNA. The second thing, there will never be another person like you who will have had your experience, will have your parents who, with their own weirdness and uniqueness, who raised you, your own experiences, which shaped you growing up. So in those first years of your life, you are completely 100% unique. There is nobody else like you. And I compare it to a seed that's planted in the ground. If you cultivate that seed throughout your life, if you're aware that that is your source of strength, sometimes you may not know exactly what it is, but you have a feeling about it, it will grow into something fantastic. But if you listen to your parents, if you listen to your peers, if you listen to culture, if you get inundated with social media and you lose a sense of who you are, of what makes you different, which is what happens to 95% of the population, then you will veer off that path. You will end up going to law school, even though law is not at all what you were destined for. You'll do well because you're motivated, but then you're 30 and you kind of burn out and you're not interested anymore. You're kind of tuning out. You start drinking, maybe you're taking drugs. You get into some bad patterns of behavior. You stop learning. Your life kind of slides downhill, even though you might be making money. And then you're 50 years old and you go, shit, what is my life, etc. You had that seed. Everybody has it, I believe. And in my book, Mastery, to illustrate it, I interviewed people who I considered contemporary masters, as opposed to everyone being sort of dead masters, which is what I usually have in my books. And one of the people I interviewed was a woman whom I completely admire, named Temple Grandin. Temple Grandin is quite well known. She was born on the autistic scale, very, very high on that scale. She had rather strong autism, to the point where her parents, at a very early age, were going to commit her to an institution. She got out of it through a series of circumstances, which I talk about in the book, and she turned herself into this amazing scientist, a very well-respected scientist, a professor at Colorado State University. She teaches about animal behavior and about autism. And I'm telling you, the point is, if someone with high-scale, high-level autism can become a master, can find their purpose in life, there's no excuse for you. There's no whining. There's no going, well, I wasn't born that way. My parents, blah, 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 blah. Well, shut up. Anybody can reach it. Yeah, if you're 40 or 50, it's starting to not look so good. But when you're young, if you understand that you will have this seed and you mine it and you cultivate it, something great will happen. So I'm firmly, firmly in the camp of believing that everybody has this power.
So as someone who has kind of studied, I'm going to suggest that you have a perspective on, I'll call it sort of like the meta narrative of human life, because you've looked at so many different lives. And I assume in reading your writing, you found patterns within human stories. Do you feel like there's kind of a point of no revival where if you haven't at least accepted, if not actually encouraged that thing within you that makes you unique and special, that, yeah, hopefully there's reincarnation, better luck next time because you kind of missed the boat? Or do you think that at any age somebody can light up and find their special calling, no matter how much or little time they have left?
Well, if you're in your 80s, I don't know what the range of possibilities are. It's starting to narrow pretty dramatically. Right. In your 60s, it's probably not great, but I have known people who have made a shift, and it's usually not like at that point in your life, you're either fairly comfortable with money or you're not. So if you're not, it's like something you're not probably going to do. But people who might have accumulated some money and they realize, God, I should have got into music. Okay, then they do it then. That's interesting. That's possible. In your 50s, it's a little more possible. In your 40s, definitely. I know many stories of people who kind of were lost, were upset, and then they kind of got their act together in their 40s. It's not great. It's not the strategy I recommend. The strategy I recommend is wake up when you're 18, 19 years old. I don't want you to suddenly get all, focused on one thing. I've got to make money. I've got to have power. I've got to have success. I want you to have fun, and I want you to have adventures when you're in your 20s. But to realize that is the key period in your life when you need to be learning, exploring, figuring out what makes you unique, developing skills, then the whole world will open up to you. So it's the earlier on you are, the better. But one thing I will tell you is this: feeling frustrated, feeling depressed, feeling disappointed is the best thing that will ever happen to you. It is a sign in your body, first and foremost, that you know something isn't right, that you're on the wrong path, right? You're not medicating yourself with drugs and alcohol and addictions.
Yeah.
Feel inside that something isn't working, something isn't right, and you're frustrated. Lean into that, press your finger into that, because it is telling you something. And that is the power of having a strong emotion like that can turn your life around. I know in my early to mid 30s, I was very depressed. I could even say at moments I was slightly suicidal because I couldn't figure it out. And you can go one of two ways in that. You can sink further and further down, or you can tell yourself, I know there's something else within me. That's why I'm depressed. I got to get my act together. So if you're older and you're feeling frustrated, my message to you is lean into that emotion, because it's telling you that something isn't right and you've got to figure it out.
Well, I really appreciate that sentiment, in large part because I think that a lot of my audience is frustrated. That's part of the draw for me and my message and my show is like, hey, we're here to encourage you and support you and inform you on making these life pivots, right? Like there's, most of us are born and we're reared and we're indoctrinated and we're given one option for life that is frankly not terribly satisfying for most people, but it's the only one we're told about. And then there's like all these other paths out there and that, they just don't talk about them. School is very like linear. And, like to your point, we take the blue pill and we plod through life. And then my job, I like to think, is to serve up the red pill. So thank you for encouraging people. I'm curious, the breadth of material that you draw from into your own work. I mean, just in 48 Laws of Power, I've got to guess that there's several hundred references made to historical anecdotes, historical, works of literature, works of lore. And I'm going to go ahead and guess, like, how much do you read? Must be a lot.
Well, that was my first book. That was quite a long time ago. I mean, I started it maybe 25 years ago. And, I was a little bit insecure about the book. I mean, here am I, this person who really, up to that moment, did not have great power or success in this world. I mean, I had done reasonably well in Hollywood, but I wasn't really very successful in it, to be honest with you. So the insecurity was, who is this nobody in this one bedroom apartment in Santa Monica to tell me what power is about, right? So to overcome that, I thought I need to do a lot of research. And I had been experienced as a researcher prior to that. I had worked in various different arenas. And in Hollywood, I had done a lot of work as a researcher. So I was skilled in that. And I thought, well, if I read hundreds of books about power, all of the kind of main resource material, and then biographies, if I covered every culture, every time period, men, women, kings, queens, peasants, the book would have a solid, substantial basis. And then people couldn't go, oh, this book, well, who's he to write a book like that? He's not a professor, blah, 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 at Yale University, et cetera. And so, people are still say that. But because it's grounded in so much research, I think people realize that I'm hitting something true here in that book.
Okay, so that makes a lot of sense. So I'm curious then, although I feel like you may have just sort of tipped your hands to the answer, but saying that you come from Hollywood, but what got you so focused on the subject of power? And did you know so two-part question, what got you so focused on it? And when you did focus on it, did you know this is going to become a lifelong exploration, or did you think you were just going to write a book?
Well, there's a lot of things happen in life. It's sort of serendipity. You often don't really plan on a very particular project or career path. It happens. And then you realize this is great. This is what I was intended to do. And you go for it. You exploit it to the nth degree. And so I hadn't worked in Hollywood, but I'd also worked in many different jobs. I had been a hotel receptionist in Paris. I worked in TV in London. I taught English in Barcelona. I did construction work in Greece. Here in Los Angeles, I worked in a detective agency. I did every kind of imaginable job, and I'd seen all sorts. I had the worst series of bosses. I had some good bosses, no doubt. There are some out there. Many of them are out there. But I also had some terrible bosses. So I had seen a lot. I had experienced a lot. And Hollywood was particularly sharp because it's an extremely Machiavellian environment, much like the music business. So it was 1995. I was in Venice, Italy, on another of my 80 different jobs. And this man who was there on the same job, he's a packager of books. He asked me if I had any ideas for a book, which I had never written before. And I improvised an idea about power, telling him that it's this timeless thing. So what I witnessed in Hollywood, or what you witnessed in the music business, people are, dressed modern, they look modern, they're all technologically sophisticated, but they're just the same as they were in the 16th, 15th, 14th, 4th century BC. Human nature hasn't changed. And so we may be less bloody. We may not be chopping off people's heads nowadays. Instead, we're firing them, or we're being kind of trollish on social media. But the level of animosity and difficulty that you have to deal with in life, this kind of constant headwind that you're facing, has never really changed because people haven't fundamentally changed. He loved the idea, and I hadn't really planned on it. It was nothing like, this is what I'm going to write a book about. This is the future of my life. It came out of me. It was a sunny day in Venice, Italy. I improvised it. I was in a good mood, but it felt right. That's often what happens to you in life. You do something, you say something, you get into a project, and it feels right. Sometimes it doesn't feel right, and you know it in your gut, and you go, whoa, I don't know if I want to do this. This felt finally in my life, like bolts of lightning are going off, fireworks are exploding in the sky. Finally, Robert Greene has found something that will energize and use all of his skills and experience up to that point. So he paid me to live while I wrote the first half of the book, which is a wonderful gesture on his part. Of course, he was a partner, and he's made millions of dollars since then on the book. But at the time, he had no idea what would happen. And, it could have been an incredible flop because it's a very strange looking book. It's a very different kind of book. So I had no idea that this was going to turn into what it ended up turning into. But once I had success there and it resonated with people, I realized that I'm on to something. And although I don't repeat the same idea in any book. Every book goes off in a new direction. Kind of the style, the way I write, somewhat of the subject matter and the approach to people is essentially the same. So I found it, and I'm a very lucky person. I'm very blessed that way.
Well, it's a really wonderful. First of all, I will say I actually love that you're a quote unquote layperson. I feel like if Jung had not actually been a psychologist and just got into his messy underbelly of humanity, but not so much tried to scientificalize everything, if that's a word, but more just like get like almost not dumb it down, but put it in completely accessible language, Yeah. And I think it's really, it's wonderful stuff. But I'm, you dropped a few clues there. So 80 jobs. And by the way, I heard your interview with Jordan Harbinger where you referenced that you got tired of counting at like 63 jobs. And you're like, I don't know, it's something in the 80s. Let's just call it. Right.
Yeah. Right.
So you obviously are somebody, and just a little bit of context for this show. So Unlock Your Potential, background on the show. It's like, I'm hunting. This is my quest. And by the way, if I ever really find it, I'll shut the show down because there won't be a point anymore. But it's like my quest to find that sort of ineffable, untouchable, pure, whatever it is, that is the essence of outlier success. People that find these vibrations in the world and just take off. It's like, can we find the common thread that weaves through all those stories, right? And you're obviously one such person. But one thing I have identified as a prerequisite for all these stories is the search, the seeker. Nobody finds who is not seeking, right? And you having gone through 80 something jobs, that's a pretty powerful indicator that you were willing to keep searching.
Yeah.
And not stay in one place that wasn't maybe fully satisfying. Talk about that journey and how you think you got wired that way in the first place, because most people will just settle.
Well, most of it's positive, but there's a slight negative aspect to it in that I have some problems with authority, to be quite honest. I don't mind working for someone who I genuinely respect and think they know their shit and they're at a much higher level than me. I will completely bend to their authority. But so many times the bosses I had were so incompetent, were so inept. I had a better idea about what the film should be like, about how to teach English to my students, about how this magazine should be run. So I had no respect for them. So I was restless. And I didn't see a future in it, right? I hated all of the politicking often involved in offices. I didn't have much stomach for it because I felt like your worth, what you're good at, your skill level should be enough to get you ahead, right? But it's not. We live in a political world. Everybody you encounter has an ego. That's law number one. Look at people and realize even the most powerful person, your boss, particularly your boss, has an ego, a very large one. And you're constantly hitting it, rubbing up against it. And you have to be careful and you have to be political. And I didn't have much patience for that. So I would go into a job for a few months and then, man, I can't stand this. There's something better out there. The grass is always greener. I'll try another job. I was working in journalism in New York and I'd work at a magazine. I was at Esquire, which is a very nice magazine. I then got offered a better position at another magazine that was actually kind of not very nice. It was a magazine for doctors. I hated it. It didn't feel like great quality. I left after a few months. I went on and on and on. I kept, hopscotching to different magazine jobs, et cetera. I couldn't find the right place. So that's part of it, was my restlessness, the fact that I don't like authority. But the third part, the most important part, is I knew deep down inside that there was something in me that was worth expressing. Basically, I know, and you're talking about outliers, I know that I'm essentially a weird individual. There's something strange about me, something strange about how I think. Some of it's good, some of it's bad, but I am different. I'm an individual, right? And I had no patience for these kind of cookie cutter jobs where you can't express yourself, you can't show what's different about you, right? And I knew as a writer, accumulating experience is sort of the golden path to becoming successful. So trying different jobs, it wasn't like a conscious strategy. It was more like a partially conscious, partially unconscious strategy. The more jobs I had, the more weird people I saw, the more awful bosses, the more kind of cunning Machiavellian courtiers I had to deal with their little knives out, the more material I was gaining. And my motto in life was, everything is material. So even the worst experience, writing in Hollywood and all that stuff, it's material, it's grist for the mill. I'm going to learn from it. So the main thing that I can tell people is, what got me through all of this was this faith in myself, that following this weird path, which to my parents looked like it was a path towards being a complete failure in life, had a purpose to it, right? And eventually all of it fell into place, a little bit by luck, but also by my persistence and my firm belief that I had something inside me that was worth expressing to this world.
So I'm going to tell you that I feel a great kinship with the story you just told, the problems with authority, I love, as you were speaking, I thought to myself, there's the saying, if you can't beat them, join them. But it seems like in your case, it was like, if you can't beat them and you're unwilling to join them, then just expose them. Right. That's kind of what you've done, which I totally relate to. But it's interesting, I think there's a place that, and I want to ask you some more about this idea of you being weird. I want to lean into that, but I want to set it up by saying that I think there's a truth that there are seasons of purpose, and that in the season of clarity of purpose, life is really fun. You know why you're here. You know what you're doing. You're going after it, right, completely engrossed. It's wonderful. Right. But I think that there's a prerequisite, like a preconditional season, that is the season of unclear purpose, but conviction that there is in fact one. Right. I'm here for this reason, and therefore I must not stop until I find it. And I think that's where so many people actually stall out and never find it. So I'm curious then, I just want to sort of state that as a preface, but I'm curious then, if you kind of backtrace your life, where do you think this notion of kind of like the teleology of your life, that there's this created imperative that you did listen to and that you did allow to have some emotional control over you, and you did allow yourself to experience the pain and frustration of, and you didn't numb it with drugs, or maybe you did, I don't know. But like, most people do a pretty good job of suppressing it, and you either chose not to or were unable to. Why do you think you were different?
Well, I'm probably very ambitious. I have to admit that. I have a certain aggressive edge to me. I'm very competitive. And I had a sense early on that there was something different about me, and the difference was good. I wasn't afraid of that. A lot of people, when you're young and you feel strange, it makes you awkward and it makes you want to be like other people. Of course, as a teenager and growing up, I wanted to be like other people. I didn't want to stick out that much, but I knew that what was different about me, the mark of Cain, if you will, was something that was worthwhile, was something that meant something, that I had, that it was there for a reason, right? So, growing up, it was pretty strong, my relationship to words and to writing and to literature. Now, I know that a lot of people don't have that, right? So I understand that maybe some people don't have that energy or that drive. And that's maybe the difference in some ways, right? I believe everybody has potentially that energy and drive, actually, and you can find it. It's in you. But for some people, it's very strong and very prevalent. Mm-hmm. It was very strong in me, and it pushed me past all of the various obstacles. So, you have two selves inside of you. You have your conscious self, where you make decisions. I'm going to go into journalism. I'm going to make some money. I'm going to become a writer, etc. And then there's the unconscious or slightly below the level of consciousness that is also directing your decisions. And you're not aware of it, but there is something, and I'm exploring it in my new book. They used to have a concept in ancient times and even in the 19th century known as the Daemon. The Daemon was this kind of spirit that talked inside of you. Socrates believed he had a daemon that told him everything that he needed to do in life. It was kind of like this spirit inside of him that came from he doesn't know where, that was directing his life and putting him on the right path. Right? Well, the fact that you have a different drive in life, something that makes you unique, something that makes you different, that is a voice inside of you that is guiding you unconsciously below the level of consciousness into your career decisions. And sometimes you're listening to it and sometimes you're not. But I was attuned to that. And so when I was 25 and I was in journalism and it wasn't working out, some people would say, well, I've got to find a better job in journalism. I've got to make it there. This is the right thing for me because I've got to make money. My voice said, it's not working out. Cut your losses now. Don't get stuck in this career path that isn't right. There's something else. Try it, explore. I went to Europe and I tried to write novels as I did all these 1,800 different jobs that I mentioned, and I had experiences. That wasn't working out. I was poor as hell. I couldn't make any money. But deep down inside, the voice kept saying, try this, try something else. And I listened to it, right? You have that voice in you, but you're not listening to it. It's drowned out by the internet, by social media, by your parents, by your peers, by all the crap that you're consuming that isn't about you, right? So get in touch with you, get in touch with who you are, with what makes you different. That is your source of power. And that was sort of what got my life on track.
Do you remember a moment when that, we'll call it your daemon? I love that term. I'm trying to remember where I've come across that term before. I know that it's a term that's used in computer programming, but I feel like I've encountered it in literature or philosophy, or you said it's Greek. But anyway, let's use the term. Do you think there was a moment when it was activated or animated or you were pointed to listen to it? Like, does anything come to mind? It's like, oh yeah, that's when I got connected to that inner voice that other people stay, oblivious to.
Well, memory is a tricky thing, and sometimes it can play games with you, and you think you remember a moment in life that it's not really accurate. So it's not science here. But when I was very young, I think I was about 10 years old. I was in third grade however old that was, or fourth grade, sorry. I remember, I've talked about this before, a teacher, Miss Fiore, she put on the chalkboard the word carpenter. And she said, we're going to play a game. And the game is to form as many words as you can out of that word carpenter, right? And the winner gets this prize. I don't remember what the hell it was, right? And I got so excited by that game. I don't know why. Very silly, stupid game. I thought, I started writing the word and. Wow, I could get the word and out of carpenter. I can get the word crap out of carpenter. She didn't really like that so much, but I put it in there anyway. I got so excited. I won the contest. And I look back on that. I don't know why that stuck in my memory, but I know that since I was a kid, I've been obsessed with words to the point where I'm almost like have a mental disorder. I'm so absorbed in the sound of words, in the look of words. I love palindromes. I don't know if you know what palindromes are. Okay. So I'm obsessed with words, with letters, with phonemes and all the other components of a word, with grammar. I love foreign languages. That was a sign early on that I have a connection to words and language and linguistics. Okay. And there's a book I recommend for people out there that I think is a great book called Frames of Mind by Howard Gardner. He's a brilliant psychologist. And he basically tries to get rid of this notion that the only form of intelligence out there, human intelligence, is intellectual, which is a cultural prejudice of ours. And he shows that there are 5 or 6 forms of human intelligence. One of them is words. One of them is music and patterns and sounds. Another one is mathematics and logic. Another one is visual and spatial imagination. Another one is kinesthetic, the movement of the body. And the last one would be social. You out there in podcast land, you have one of these frames of intelligence in you. Genetically, that's your brain has many different exciting functions and things it can do, but it kind of has an inclination towards that one frame. Some people two, but usually it's just one. And if you know that, if you're aware of that, if you know that you're a kinesthetic person, that you're all about moving the body, then don't become a professor of philosophy, right? You're going to be miserable your whole life, right? Whereas if you're somebody who's very into math and logic, don't go into some other completely inappropriate field. So for me, it was words. I realized this is it. And then I became fascinated with books and reading. So I knew unconsciously, or however you want to express it, that this was the thing I was most attracted to. And, I was filled with such conviction that all the stuff my parents tried to tell me about earning a living, going to law school, becoming a doctor, I just get the hell out of here, get out of my brain. I'm closing my door, I'm reading books, I'm writing stories. This is what I want to do in life. And I'm not going to listen to you. So it was pretty strong in me very early on.
I want to sort of apply what you just said, that I hope that, most listeners out there, also, I'll say many listeners out there are also parents. I am a parent. I have 4 kids. Do you have kids? No,
I don't. I have cats. But,
well, I don't know if they have frames of mind, but I know my kids do. I have a cat. It's actually my son's cat, and he has a particularly annoying frame of mind, but we tolerate him. But I will say, I think this is so important. I was that same kid. I dropped out of high school my junior year because the scholastic pathway appeared to me to be just an elongated euphemism for job training, that they start you on very young. And I had no interest in those jobs. Thus, I had no interest in that school. And I was able to, my parents were actually open-minded, and they ended up supporting me in my decision to drop out of high school my junior year to study jazz piano, to actually become, to teach myself. I didn't even play, but I said, you know what? If I develop enough aptitude with this, then you don't ever have to worry about me starving. I can always trade sound for food and maybe money. Yeah. And they bought me a piano, and I went to, so anyway, my point is I had those parents, and I believe that I'm my experience in my 20s of being a nomadic jazz musician and learning to improvise and learning to create spontaneously something that was both new and old at the same time on a nightly basis, that became the foundation for not only what I do, but the way that I do everything in my life now. And I'm very successful at it. And so because my parents weren't rigid and they weren't, call it closed-minded, I've been able to benefit from that. And I don't know how open your parents were to your feedback, but you got your way. But some parents, they just won't have it. And I think they cripple their kids for life, or maybe not if they end up with a good enough therapist. But I'm calling to the parents out there, don't be that parent that's so rigid and fear-based that you can't imagine that there could be an alternative path than maybe the one that you see or the one that you were told about, and that you want to try to force your kid down. So that's my PSA for the moment. Not to hijack the call, but.
No. It's a great story to hear about your life. And yeah, I agree 100%. But there's 2 ways you can look at it. Children are naturally rebellious. If your child is not rebellious, something is wrong, particularly when they get in their 14 age, their teen years. And you want to use that rebellious nature, right? You want them, it's a sign that they know that they don't want to follow your path in life. They don't want to be a clone of you. They want to do something. Sometimes they're actually trying to do the very opposite of what you're doing, right? Don't get upset about it. Don't whine, don't complain, don't try and force them. Find little ways of actually encouraging and channeling that rebellious nature into productive areas, okay? But some children, they need a lot more nurturing. They're not so certain about their path in life. And the parents, by being over-directing them, create tremendous amounts of damage to them that they'll never get over, right? So what you want to do is you want to observe your child at a very early age. I'd go back to 2 years old, even earlier if you want, and see that inclination in them. Visualize that seed that I'm talking about as being planted. Observe them as they interact with objects, with things around them, with books, with people, with animals, and get a sense of what makes them different. Your natural response is, I want my child just to be like me. You're not thinking that consciously, but your narcissism is like that. I want them to do exactly what I did in life, because I did the best things, obviously. Shut that up. Look at them as an individual with their own path in life, their own interests, their own purpose, and observe them and go, this son or daughter of mine, they love sports. They love moving their bodies. They're like, there's this kinesthetic type that I'm talking about. I'm a psychiatrist, or I'm a professor. I'm not so comfortable with that. No, they're different from you. Let them follow that path. Be open to them, encourage them in some ways, right? And so just having that kind of energy will have an incredible difference. Now, my parents were relatively open. They understood that I love books, and obviously they're going to encourage that because they think that that can even lead to some, lucrative career, and they gave me some pressure, but they didn't imply it too strongly enough that it warped me. But the worst parents are those that try and direct their children's lives. They try and fill up their schedule with activities that they think are right for the child, that the child aren't naturally gifted for, So if you're in school and you're forced to learn math and you're not good at math, right? It's not what naturally comes to you. It not only makes you not like math, makes you hate it, it also turns you off from any kind of learning.
Yeah.
And the one thing you want the most is your child to have a joy, to see pleasure in learning. So you're learning the piano at the age of 16 or 17. It gives you incredible pleasure. And so that allows you now to practice without getting bored or without getting too restless, okay? You want your child to have that sense of pleasure. Learning is fun. Developing a skill is fun. Becoming good at a sport is great, right? Whatever it is, that's what you want to instill in them, not this sense that everything is drudgery and tedium. Because the way the human being is set up, I imagine animals are like this as well, is that anything painful we try and avoid, and anything pleasurable we go towards. If you make your child think that what is truly pleasurable is learning and acquiring skills, then they're set for life.
Yes. Then they're set for life. Well said. It's interesting. You said kids are rebellious. I have a sort of a nuance that I apply to that. And that's worked. It served me well. I have actually yesterday was my second oldest 18th birthday. So I have an 18-year-old and a 19-year-old now, two adults and two younger ones. And I've always said, I haven't always said, I've come around to saying that I actually don't think kids are rebellious. I simply think kids are experimental because they want to differentiate. I actually think parents are rebellious. It's parents who rebel against the experimentation of their kids in their efforts to differentiate. And then what you do is you create an association that experimentation equals conflict and contention. And it's actually the parents that create that association. Whereas if you just create the space for them to try things out, I think you can, we've been able to get through without really any rebellion. We have a blast with our kids, and so I think parents, they have a lot bigger hand in this affair than they want to take credit for. But anyway, I'll get off my soapbox.
No,
so let me ask you.
Go ahead. Very wisely put. I agree with you.
Oh, thank you. You know what, folks? Timestamp it. Robert Greene just said that I said something that was wise. So I think I'm retiring now.
Well, you're a parent and I'm not. So you have firsthand experience. All my blathering is kind of philosophical, intellectual, and abstract. Yours is based on experience and reality. So I give it its weight.
Well, I appreciate that. We do both have experience being children, though.
I sure do. I still have that experience.
Yeah, actually, that's a good point. I think you want to prolong that experience, right? So let me ask you this. I talk a lot about, and just so you know, I'm also a very weird person. I was actually born with a genetic disorder called Waardenburg syndrome. So I was sort of, I identified as weird, like in a negative sense, like defective at an early age. And I've evolved my perspective on that into something much healthier, I think. But I talk a lot about leaning into your weirdness and using your weirdness as your clue to your created purpose. And, you know, it's a leading indicator of why you're here, right? Is the day you figure out you're weird, it's like, oh, good, that maybe I'm here for something special then, right? So I wonder if you could talk about, like, are you comfortable if I just ask you straight up, like Robert, like, tell me about your weirdness. Like, what's that all about?
Well, it's basically that I never really fit in anywhere, you know? So I love books and I love like literature, but at an early age, I was fascinated by people who came from a much different background than my life. I was interested in the African-American students who were bused into my college, into my junior high school. Some of them became my best friends. I was interested in people who were kind of drug addicts, who were druggies, who came from the wrong side of the tracks. So I was supposed to be one way, but I didn't fit in with that kind of rich, privileged, intellectual, bookish world. I fit in more with the other side, even though I still, you know, had this other element to me. And then in college, I love literature. I love learning languages. I loved it, but I don't fit into that university system. Mm-hmm. I don't want to be a professor. I don't want to have this kind of wall being erected between history and life.
Yeah, you're way too politically incorrect to ever be accepted at a university, I would imagine.
I hope so. So university, it didn't fit, right? Like, I love learning, I love history, but I'm not going to pursue that as a career. On and on and on. Each thing, it's like you're trying to fit the proverbial square peg in a round hole. I tried forcing myself into that round hole, but it wasn't going in because I wasn't fitting in. It wasn't right, you know. And then I go into journalism, and yeah, I like writing, but everything is so banal and mundane. You're writing about things that only last for a few days. It's all about trends and fashions, and what boredom, you know. I'm interested in timeless things and things that don't change, and psychology and the unconscious. I didn't fit. Get the hell out of there, you know? And then I'm like wandering around Europe. I know I keep repeating the same stories. I'm sorry, but, you know, I'm trying to write novels and everything and stuff. And, you know, that kind of total bohemian life doesn't feel right to me, because I do believe in helping other people. I do believe in that there's a higher purpose than just feeding my ego with these kind of rantings of stories that aren't really leading anywhere. So that doesn't fit. And then it comes time to write my book, which changed my whole life. And, you know, I'm writing about power, and I decide I'm not going to write a book that looks like anything out there. And I don't really know where it came from, but I created a structure that I've since have used in all of my books that is unlike any other structure of any book you will ever find out there. I'm not tooting my own horn. It's just because it could have been, you might hate it, but I have stories and interpretation and images and sections. And then at the very end, a reversal. I created that. That book is the absolute perfect reproduction of my own weirdness. It doesn't look like any other book out there. It doesn't read like any other book out there. I had the liberty, the freedom, the blessing to create something that reflects all those things that weren't fitting in. And finally, that square peg fit in, because that's what I was meant to do. So I don't know if I'm answering your question.
No, you are wonderfully. And I'm curious, have you ever read Dune, the Frank Herbert books?
When I was about 15 years old.
So I asked you, I kind of honed in on that word weird. I love that word. Do you remember in Dune, they talked about the weirding ways?
Yeah.
So are you, I know you're a word guy. Do you know the origins of the word weird?
I saw it in one of my readings a few years ago, but I can't remember it exactly right now. So educate.
I love it. I love, this is when I was liberated the day I learned what weird actually means, because, and I've done, and by the way, I mean, I'm coming to you with the benefit of thousands of hours of therapy to get as comfortable with these concepts as I have. But the concept, the word weird literally means, it's an old English word, weird, W-Y-R-D, which means fate or destiny. And to be weird means to have the ability to control one's fate.
Oh, wow. That's fantastic. No, I actually didn't know that. That's very interesting.
And isn't that an empowering connotation to be a weirdo?
Yeah. Yeah. And the thing is, when you're young, you sometimes feeling weird like that is painful.
Very.
And is what often sets you on the wrong path in life, right? You're in high school and people are making fun of you because you don't quite fit in. You dress weirdly, or you look different, or you talk differently, and you go,
or you have an outlier ability that they want to suppress because it's off-putting to them because it's too good.
Exactly. Envy. So, and if you're slightly vulnerable and fragile, it will wound you for the rest of your life, and you'll be running away from it. And it happens to a lot of people. So it's a double-edged sword in that it can often be the source of pain, the source of being different, the source of not fitting in, of people looking at you like you're strange, right? But it's also the source of all of your greatest pleasures in life. And it's hard for when you're 17 to know this, but the idea that if I were a parent, is if you accept your weirdness, by the time you're 35, people are going to be praising you. They're going to be kowtowing you. They're going to be kissing your feet for how interesting your music is, how brilliant your art is, what a great business you're starting. You're the next Elon Musk, blah, blah, blah. So just be patient and realize that it's the source of maybe some strange, awkward feelings now. But man, they're going to be all conformists in their 30s and 40s and miserable and drugged out. And you're going to be weird and different, and you're going to be one of the most successful people in the planet. So I don't know if it would ever work with a child, but that would be my...
I mean, I'll be honest, that's a conversation I have tried to have with my kids. And I'd say it gets a mixed reception. It's probably well received in the abstract and then tossed out in the moment when it should be applied. But
exactly.
Such is life. But I do remember something you said in the interview with Jordan Harbinger. You said the most powerful people in the world are the people that have gotten very, very comfortable with how weird they are, and that they've really figured out a way to leverage it. I think that you said something to that effect. Am I getting that right?
Well, yeah. I mean, look at anybody around you that is successful in any field, and what you would say is they're one of a kind, right? There's nobody else like them out there. I had the good fortune of doing my fourth book with the rapper 50 Cent. 50 Cent.
Which book was that?
It's called The 50th Law.
Oh, okay. Great.
It came out in 2008. It's a meditation on the power of being fearless in life. And it's very relevant to what I'm talking about, because, a lot of what holds you back in these areas are your fears of being different, your fears of being ridiculed. But the thing about 50 is, I got to spend time with him, and I spent time on the streets of Southside Queens where he grew up. And there were hundreds of other 50s out there, kids like him who were dealing drugs on the streets, kids who were in and out.
Because he was an actual gangster drug dealer, right?
Yeah, he's
got real street cred, right?
Well, he's got street cred up the wazoo. He was shot 9 times point blank in the side of his face. He still has a bullet lodged in his mouth. That guy's got street cred. Yeah.
Yeah, seriously.
And the thing is, I kept saying, why is he different? Why did he turn into who he is? Whereas all these other kids, unfortunately, fell into the prison system, which is an abomination in our country, or had other kinds of issues and problems. How did he end up being different? People like that, like 50 Cent, like Jay-Z, Like if you love jazz, like a Miles Davis or a John Coltrane, there's nobody else out there like them. And that's what makes them different. That's what makes them successful. If you could go, yeah, there's someone who's just like John Coltrane, that means that diminishes who he is. That means he's not so great, right? But there's nobody else like them. And the people, you can look at it with Elon Musk in business. You can look at it in politics, although politics is kind of a strange avenue. Or you can look at it in sports like Kobe Bryant or whatever. They're one of a kind. And that's why they are famous and successful and powerful. So just drill that into people's heads. Can't you understand that? That you're not, if you try and be like other people, you're going to end up being like other people and you're going to be forgotten and no one will know who you are. And maybe that is your path in life. There's nothing wrong with that, unless you have a great deal of ambition and you want something else for yourself. Being different is your only way to stand out and do something meaningful in this world.
And I'm gonna sort of operationalize that in the specific context that a lot of our listeners are in, which is either current entrepreneurs or sort of nascent or considering becoming entrepreneurs, and say that as much as there is sort of a theory and a I don't know, almost a trope in entrepreneurship of like, oh, find a successful person and just, copy the success or emulate what somebody else did. I believe that maybe there was a time for that, but I think what you're trying to do is learn as much. You're trying to compress the learning cycle by learning from other people's mistakes. You're trying to emulate perhaps the mechanics of how certain people do other things. But fundamentally, if you're not clear on what makes you different, you're not clear on what's going to make you successful as an entrepreneur. I just want to state that I want to declare it to the audience. So I'm curious then, on this thread of this weirdness and how it's kind of your unique currency in this world. Having studied the powerful people that you have, do you find this as a real consistency, almost like an axiom of power, is that the powerful people are people who have not only are they weird, because I guess in a sense we all are, but they're people that have had particular dissonance or struggle around their weirdness. And for whatever reason, instead of, processing it as defeat, they were able to harness it and channel it and convert it into, fuel, a la, let's say, Michael Jordan getting cut from his basketball team, right? That's like the apocryphal chip on his shoulder story that that there's something that happens in a life where your weirdness puts you in opposition to the mainstream of the world. And then you're able to capture that, convert it into fuel and use it to try to dominate the system that hurt you. Is that a common theme? Is that a truism, or is it not that common?
Well, there's many different paths in life. That's kind of the more extreme, slightly violent version. And there are many, many examples of that. Then there are people who it's a little softer around the edges. And they kind of, so it's a process. When you're in your 20s, you have to be patient. If you're impatient to show your weirdness and do something so different before you have experience, before you have skill, you're just going to be laughed off the stage, right? What you create is not going to have any power, not going to have any weight behind it. Mm-hmm. So you have to be patient. You have to understand that it's a dance. So going back to John Coltrane, to me, the greatest jazz artist my favorite, what made him so weird and different by the time he was in his 30s, he created sounds that had never existed before in the long history of jazz, was that he had spent 8, 9, 10 years of intensive learning of patterns, of music, of classical music, of jazz. When in this kind of state of humility, I want to absorb all of the musical patterns. And then when he's in his 30s and his career starts taking off and he leaves Miles Davis's group, he's able to create something no one has ever heard before. And it's powerful and it's great, right? So you have to understand when your season is due, when it's right for you to do that. And you have to be willing to learn and to be at the feet of a master who you respect, knowing in the back of your mind, as I say in Master, In Spanish, they say, al maestro la cuchillada, meaning to the master goes the knife in the back. And the idea is that if you're learning sword fighting from the greatest master of them all, eventually you're going to stab that master and kill him because you're going to be so much better than him. And that's when you will become a master. So you're biding your time until you kill the person you learned from and you step into their shoes, right? So sometimes that process can be gradual. In your 20s, you're learning from someone. You suddenly realize at 30, this is the kind of business I'm going to start. I'm an entrepreneur. It's going to be something that's different that I love. And it's not too radical a difference because maybe you're not such a radical person, but slowly you get comfortable with it and you get weirder and weirder and weirder as you get older. That's a path I've seen many times. The other path is you're more rebellious, you're more impatient, but you have true skill, and you're 31, and you go out there and you start something that no one has ever seen before, and it's fantastic, and it takes off. It depends on your personality. So understand in life that there are no cookie cutter paths, that your path is different from other people. And being weird means you're following your own path. It means you're not going to be just like anyone else, which means you're not going to be doing the same kind of rebellious actions that some other rock star or rapper out there did, right? If that's not who you're comfortable with, you have your own style. If you're a slightly more conservative entrepreneur, you're going to take a little bit more time to create that thing that's more genuinely weird and strange and beautiful. So, the most important thing that you can learn in life, to me, the most lesson number one is know yourself. That is what's inscribed on the Oracle of Delphi. That is the origin of all wisdom, according to Socrates. Know yourself. Know what makes you different. Know what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are. Maybe being an overt, weirdo, radical person doesn't quite fit you for various reasons, and you understand that, and you're comfortable with it. You're going to take a slower path. Just be aware of who you are, what your strengths are, and what your inclinations are.
So I really appreciate the gradations that there's, to the extent that everybody maybe is weird, it doesn't all present the same way. There's maybe a lot more subtlety for some people. I want to say, do you agree with the statement that not all who acquire great amounts of power are necessarily doing it for malicious reasons, and or that it has anything inherently bad about it, that there can be benevolent or neutral acquisitions of great power, or does it always end up corrupting?
No, obviously not. I wouldn't have written the book that I wrote. Power is a tool. It's an instrument, right? So that large knife that you wield can be used for cutting vegetables and chopping down trees and creating firewood and doing all these productive, great things in life, or it could be used for violence and killing people and injuring them. So it's not the knife that is inherently evil. It's the human that's using it, right? So we find people who are, who take power, like a Gandhi, like a Martin Luther King, et cetera, or like Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the president I admire. They take that power to do great good in this world, right? And there are other people, too many examples come to mind, who are the opposite, right? But the idea that power is all evil and, that kind of whiny liberal guilt sort of approach to the power, I find, and believe me, I'm more on that side anyway. So I'm not coming as a Republican here, but that kind of approach is just so false, and I hate it. I can't tell you how much I hate it, right? If you believe in something strongly, if you want to change the world, if you believe in climate change in the environment, you want to help stop climate change, you believe in the environment, you better start learning about power. Yes. You better start learning about how it works. You better start learning about politics, about all of the obstructions you're going to be facing, about people's psychology and why they're resistant to it, why they have their short-term thinking. If all you want to do is whine and complain about power and about how evil it is, that means that you're not really interested in changing. You're just interested in hearing the sound of your own voice. You're just a latent narcissist who likes feeling great about themselves, but isn't really doing anything to create change. So power is an instrument. Learn how to use it well. right? Learn how to make it something that will get change in this world, right? And don't be so guilt-ridden about it.
Thank you. Wonderfully articulated my thoughts. I'll be totally blunt. I am on a mission to accumulate, frankly, as much power as I can in an ethical way, as quickly as I can, because I hit a point at 39 years old 4 years ago where I realized I'm a pretty intelligent, convicted, passionate person who is basically impotent because I don't have the power to affect any of the things that I think need to change in the world.
Right.
And so I appreciate that you've given some sanction to that approach. Final question, and then I know you've already stayed past the allotted time, which I'm so grateful for. Have you identified, and I think this is what I was trying to ask earlier, and I kind of fumbled the question, but have you identified a single or a regular recurring set of fuel sources for people that want to tap in, activate or tap into or acquire the ambition to go after power for benevolent purposes? Because it's a huge amount of work and it requires a lot of effort. And I think when I was talking about converting, pain or trauma into this ambition, that's what I was looking for, is like, what are the fuel sources that you find people can run on to operate at the level that it takes to acquire power? And let's caveat that and say, only follow this advice if you're going to use it for good.
Well, in my book, The 33 Strategies of War, I have a chapter on what I call the death ground strategy. And basically what it's about is, it comes from Sun Tzu's book, The Art of War. If you want to get an army to be motivated to fight like hell, put their back against a mountain or put their back against the ocean, right? So it's either win this battle or die, because there's no place to retreat to, right? And it's a similar thing to the infamous story of Cortez, right? The burning of the ships, which actually wasn't the burning of the ships. What he did was he had somebody go underneath the ships and drill holes in them, because he didn't want his soldiers thinking at some point, we can go back on the ships and go back to Cuba. We don't have to stay here. We're only 500 of us against hundreds of thousands of Aztecs. So he literally had holes bored into the bottom of the ships, claiming that it was like some kind of barnacle or whatever that had done it. He sank the ships. There's no going back. It's either win here in Mexico or you're all going to die, right? So I talk about death ground strategy because if you don't have a sense of urgency or desperation, you never quite get the energy up to do anything in life. Unfortunately, that is human nature. So think of it as like this kind of pressurized environment that you live in, almost like in a barometric sense. If you're feeling that pressure, you wake up in the morning, God damn, I got to get this done. It's on me. I'm feeling this weight on me. I've got to act. I've got to get these people in line. I've got to fire this guy. I've got to do this thing here, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If that pressure is very loose and you're not feeling it all, it's a bright, sunny day, et cetera. There's no pressure on you. You'll get up late. You'll maybe get around to working at 3:00 in the afternoon. I'll do it tomorrow. Why not? Right? That is a fundamental law of human nature. So you have to create the pressure for yourself. If you don't create the pressure, if you don't feel it, all of my advice will be completely meaningless and nothing will ever happen. It's up to you. Nothing I can say is going to change that. So you have to find ways of literally creating that. So when I'm writing a book, it's very easy to go, oh, I could just finish it tomorrow. Why do I have to do that? I create deadlines for myself. I create this sense of, damn it, Robert, if you spend another week on this, you're really blowing it. You're a loser. You're falling behind your schedule, right? I put pressure on myself, right? There's a great story. I think it's Thomas Edison, where he had some project. I think it was to light the city of New York, right? And it was an idea that was just absolutely ridiculously absurd. Nobody believed he could ever accomplish it because it was based on the light bulb and electrical power, et cetera, because it was all gas lighting at that time. He did something strange. Before he was even ready to even think about it, He talked about it to the press. Yes. Why are you doing that? He's going, I'm putting pressure on myself. Now the world knows about it. If I don't make it happen, I'm humiliated. I've ruined my reputation. He created this pressure, this sense of urgency. My reputation is on the line. I better get this project done or I'm going to look like crap, right? There are all sorts of subtle ways to do that to yourself. But if you don't feel that ocean at your back or that mountain at your back, you're not going to fight with much energy or urgency. And I recommend reading that chapter in 33 Strategies of War, because I think it's a profound psychological truth about what makes us human. What made us the species that we are, for better or worse, is the sense of the pressure of the environment we lived in when we were evolving, and the pressures of this kind of weak animal that stands on 2 feet, that's not very fast, that doesn't have claws, that doesn't have big teeth, doesn't have poison, facing leopards, all kinds of horrible things. The pressure of the environment was intense. And under that pressure, the human brain evolved at this incredibly rapid rate. So we're creatures that evolved from that pressures of the environment. If you don't replicate that in your own life, you're never going to evolve. You're never going to change. You're never going to create that. You're never going to accumulate power.
And by the way, we're the descendants of the ones within that species that survived.
Right.
So it's incumbent on us. Thank you. I mean, thank you so much. When I started Entre, I remember I would go live on social media all the time, and I would talk about this educational movement that I was starting and this big thing I was doing. And people were like, Jeff, like, you sound like one of those blowhards. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm going to be humiliated if I don't follow through.
Right. Exactly.
So anyway, thank you. Thank you, Robert. Amazing. Thanks so much for being here. I wish we had more time. Tell the world, in case they don't know, because they've been hiding under a rock somewhere, tell the world how they can go find out more about you, get access to your books, maybe follow you on social. What would you suggest they do?
Well, I have a very ancient website that dates back hundreds of thousands of years called powerseductionandwar.com. The and is spelled out, powerseductionandwar.com. And that has links to all 8 or 7 of my books, sorry.
Soon to be 8, it sounds like.
Yeah, well, it's not soon. Give me a couple more years.
Okay.
And it has links to my Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, and all the other things that you possibly might be interested in. And actually an email address where you can send me your hate mail or your love mail or whatever it is that you want to send me. So that would be the place that I would go.
Wonderful. I'm looking at it now. And for a 100,000-year-old website, it looks pretty clean. No, wonderful. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Any final thoughts on power, seduction, war, or other for the audience?
No, just it's been a great discussion with you. I love hearing people with their own source of wisdom and their own stories. So, I can tell that you are, a unique weirdo, if you like, in life, and that is your source of power. And so I think that's the main message out there. In a time of rampant conformity, our survival as a species depends on the opposite, on more and more individuals who are out there kind of cultivating their strangeness, what makes them unique and diverse, and coming up with things that make culture and human species worthwhile, So I don't know. I'm going to get off my soapbox now.
That's wonderful. Cultivate Your Strangeness. Favorite Coltrane album? That's a good note to end on.
Kulo Se Mama. That's the album. That first song, it's about 18 minutes long, and it starts off and it's like just noise, and you go, "What the hell is this? This is awful." And then about 8 minutes in, some kind of order is created out of all the chaos. And you hear this incredible African beat and everything starts coming together. And it's like a trance he puts you through. It's so beautiful and so amazing. And then by the 12th minute, I think it reaches this crescendo. And you go, this is the greatest thing I've ever heard. It started off so discordant. And the other tracks on the album are also really good. But it's that first one that I find utterly sublime, which is sort of the subject of my next book. So
if you loved that episode, then you're definitely going to love this one. Check it out.
What's the difference between winning and losing? What's the separator between success and failure? What's the separator between being happy and sad? I believe it's one more. You're one decision away from changing your life. You are much closer than you think that you're one away.